So Marie and I are out here on the battlefield in Gettysburg once again, and we're going to discuss the township behavior, specifically to include Gus Frendenwald's. Where would you like to start?
So this I feel is like a report card of our taxpayer-funded employees, and especially because of his recent behavior at the Planning Commission meeting and the BOS. So when I first met Gus, it must have been 20 years ago, and it was because an adjacent property owner was going to subdivide a part of his property off. And I, of course, was going to testify as to my opinions of that. So the usual procedure, which I've followed in Philadelphia when I lived there, was you go to the municipal building and you ask to see the file and you sit there and review the information.
What file?
Their property file.
Because some people may not know anything about this, where you have a background.
Okay. So you go to the municipal building to check out the property file, where they keep any previous permits, certificate of occupancy if it's a new build, etc.
Tell me about the first time you met Gus.
Okay, the first time I met Gus was about 20 years ago, when I had first purchased the home here. And I had received a certified letter indicating that my adjacent property owner was going to subdivide his property. So the hearing date was on there, so I thought I'm going to do my due diligence because I intended on going to the hearing and testifying.
That makes sense.
So I went into the office, asked Gus to see the file, and he told me, "You're not allowed to see that file." Now that surprised me because in Philadelphia, I always went to check out files, property files. And
why did you do that?
Well, when something new was coming into the neighborhood, say a restaurant wanted to open up or any business, you have the opportunity as a resident to go and speak before the board. And that was the zoning board in Philadelphia.
So you didn't do this in your professional capacity. You were just doing this as a resident who was concerned about what was happening in the neighborhood.
The reason I would go check the files is because of my background as a real estate legal secretary for, umpteen years. And zoning is very important. The Planning Commission, it's very important that you know what's going on in your neighborhood. So in Philadelphia, I lived in a small little community. And so if something came up and there was a zoning notice posted on a building, I would check it out. And then during my lunch hour, I would go over to City Hall, ask to see the file, and they would set you up at a little table and you can review the file. So it's necessary to check the file out and do due diligence, especially if you're going to go and testify at the hearing, at any sort of zoning hearing or ordinance hearing. When I received this letter, I went over to Huntington Township to see Gus. And I asked Gus if, I wanted to see the file. He told me, "No, you're not allowed to see that file. That's a private file." I had told him it's a public file. He insisted, "No, it's not." So I assumed maybe this was a township. It was different from a first-class county and city. In the meantime, he said to me, "Sit down, little lady, and let me explain to you how things work here." So I dutifully sat down, and he proceeded to say, and I will never, it's indelibly marked in my brain. He told me that, in this rural community, we've lived here all our lives and we pretty much leave our neighbors do what they want. I was shocked at that. I thought, here is a man who's a zoning officer and he's telling me we let people do what they want. So I dutifully sat there while he went on to explain how things work. And I really don't remember the rest of his speech. But when he finished his little explanation, I looked at him because the entire time I kept thinking, they don't abide by the statutes? So I mentioned that to Gus. I said, are you telling me this township doesn't abide by the statutes of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? His face dropped. He realized what he had told me and said, no, that's not what I'm saying. That's exactly what I heard. This is an old boys club, and we pretty much do anything we want around here.
Okay, so the second incident you had with Gus had to do with
Yes.
trash contract bidding?
Yes, that happened about 2 years ago, and it was when the country was opening up. So they had a bid opening public meeting at the York Springs Borough Building because there are 4 municipalities that are grouped together in Adams County. Adams County years ago had indicated, I guess for efficiency and to get better, maybe better prices on trash hauling for the residents, they put Huntington Township, York Springs Borough, Tyrone Township, and Lattimore Township in a group. So I wanted to attend, of course, the bid opening to see what they were going to do and what the bids were about. So when I walked into the borough office, I was like one of the first residents there. And the first thing I noticed was the plexiglass at the front desk so that you can't hear anyone. So what happened was the York Springs Borough Secretary came and asked what I was doing there, and I said, I'm attending the public meeting. She said, this isn't a meeting for the public. I told her, yes, it was. So that went on for a little bit, and I heard Gus, who was sitting behind the plexiglass about maybe 6-8 feet in, he had said something, and I thought he also said that this was not a public meeting. Eventually, I was allowed in with 2 other residents. And so at the next, they opened the bids, etc. So I went to the next BOS meeting where this was going to be discussed and voted on. And during the discussion, I happened to mention that York Springs Borough Secretary indicated it wasn't a public meeting, and that Gus had said the same thing. At that point, I've never seen Gus move so fast. He literally ripped himself and his chair straight around to face me and screamed at me, that's not what I said. I was taken so aback, I thought he was going to assault me. I literally went back in my chair. So because of my upbringing, I was always taught, if you find out you're wrong about something, you apologize. So that's what I did. Of course, no one at the none of the supervisors and Gus said anything about his outburst. The following month, of course, I filed a formal complaint against his behavior at a public meeting. And to this day, I have never heard whether he was admonished for that. I never received an apology from the Board of Supervisors, which was Paul Geis was the chairman at that point. Jeff King was the vice chair. And never an apology from Gus. But that shows what kind of type of people these are here.
Because you talk about the other 2 residents. Did they have to fight to get in there? Did they have to have words with the secretary? Or
No, because by that time, I had convinced them that it was. And I later found out that that's what Gus had told her also, had told the secretary that it is a public meeting. I had misunderstood because of the plexiglass. You know, I do have a bit of a hearing issue, and especially from this big plexiglass thing they had on the front desk.
Okay, so nobody spoke to the fact that Gus screamed at you during the supervisors meeting?
No. No one spoke to the fact that his outburst at a public meeting was totally unprofessional, and it leaves a bad impression on others. Now, I was the only resident there. The rest were planning commission members, the regular crew that comes that are officials or employees. So I literally, for 2 years, was the only resident that would attend these Board of Supervisors meetings.
So in March of 2025, the Planning Commission had a meeting, and at the end of the meeting, Gus reminded everyone about an electronics pickup held by Waste Management.
Yes.
And what happened there?
Okay. So, as Gus was discussing, to remind the residents that there was the electronic recycling coming up in May, the discussion kind of got a little odd because Mr. Longstreth, who is the engineer from Shara Design for the township, he described, well, I have this large flat screen TV that's been sitting in my garage for so long. Can I bring that? And Gus said, and I think a couple of people chimed in, no, you have to be a customer of Waste Management. So he was very disappointed. Kyle Smith, who is a Planning Commission member, said to Mr. Longstreth, well, if you know a township resident, you just let him take it for you. That surprised me because there's a contract with Waste Management. The discussion about this and whether who can come and bring their recycling, it's Waste Management and it's anyone in, I believe, well, actually anyone in Adams County could come, I would assume, if they're Waste Management customers. It doesn't have to be part of those 4 townships. I was a little surprised. No, I was really surprised that Gus had indicated, well, you know, if you just slip me $5, you can have your, lift your recycling into the container and recycle your electronics. That brings into question, as a resident, where's this guy's integrity? How come, and who is it that he allows to do that? Is that a message that the township supervisors want out there that, oh, slip Gus $5 and we'll let you recycle your electronics?
Is that what's allowable, like in the contract, that anybody who's in Adams County, can I come from Pittsburgh because I'm a Waste Management customer in Pittsburgh? Can I come from Pittsburgh and drop off my stuff at Huntington Township?
You know, the contract that they sent me, I don't think that's the actual contract. This was something they attached to the bidding. And in there, it just has literally, I think, 2 sentences. Waste Management will have you'll have an electronics recycling twice a year. And that's why they have one in Lattimore, and then Huntington hosts it in the spring. Gus did say that any Waste Management customer can come. And I'm sure, like most of the people, I'm not sure, I can't confirm this, but the only bid that we got in was from Waste Management. And I think a lot of the townships around us in Adams County actually have Waste Management. I know Gettysburg had someone else to begin with, and I don't know what happened, but they changed theirs, but they're in a different group. That's what's disturbing about him. He just does whatever he wants, like he told me 20 years ago. We pretty much do what we want around here.
It shows.
That was the message. That was him trying to get me to realize it's a good old boys club here.
So several months ago, a resident came to the township asking about what the township was doing in regards to their neighbor and the water removal.
It was rainwater runoff from 2 other properties.
A resident, Betsy, spoke up at the meeting and asked if there had been some kind of resolution to this.
Yes, Mrs. Howard spoke at the April 10th meeting and asked what the status was, if it had been resolved. So Dave Boyer stated that letters were sent to the adjacent property owners and asked Gus what was happening with it.
The father fixed his problem, moved the spout.
Okay.
The son, I think we're gonna take a 2x4 to him.
Gus's response that the father had remediated what he needed to, but the son, we're going to have to take a 2x4 to him. I think there were only 3 of us there that were residents. I mean, that was shocking to hear out of the mouth of a public employee. I mean, it's a threat, and it shows unprofessionalism. Neither Dave Boyer nor that solicitor, Todd King, said one word, did not say, Gus, that's improper, it could be considered a threat, and you're going to put the township in jeopardy. Nothing was said about it. And that's why it's upsetting to see how these public employees over the past years get away with things like this at public meetings, even though they have in their handbook a code of conduct, which we've discussed is self-explanatory. I mean, it's just common sense. You don't make threats at a public meeting that you're going to take a 2x4 to a resident because he hasn't complied with your letter.
But you shouldn't make threats at all.
The officials and the employees, they're supposed to be kept to a higher standard because they are representing the residents of the community. Their behavior is a direct reflection on what the culture is of of our community. For Gus to be allowed by the board and that solicitor to issue a threat to a resident, that should have been immediately stopped.
Yeah, personally, when I saw it there and I was listening, I could not believe it. I just shook my head. I mean, this guy, never ceases to amaze me. Every meeting, there's something that he's doing or had done that is totally unprofessional. It's really, I think it's disgusting when you see that because, as you said, they're supposed to be held, their own code, their own policies say that they're supposed to be held to a higher standard.
And the problem, I believe, as a resident just going to these meetings these past 3 years, the board of supervisors who we elect to run the township I think they have a hands-off approach. They leave Gus do what they want, and they leave the employees do what they want. And one of the incidents I remember going to, the whole Miller litigation about that indoor baseball, what do we call it, the baseball?
The sports complex, Marie, Jesus.
Oh, that's Gus's, that's Gus's terminology, which he's been told he's not to use that, but he uses it a lot. But I had attended one of the hearings in the Miller issue, and the attorney representing the Millers was questioning Gus about going onto the property. Apparently, one Saturday, Gus had driven up to the Miller property, and I'm not even sure if the Millers, I don't think they lived there, I'm not sure of that, but apparently Gus saw a bunch of cars there and noticed there were little children, I guess Little League was going into the building. So he parks his car, goes up to the building, and one of the parents, I guess thought he was maybe a grandparent, left him walk in, and he, good old Gus, the zoning officer, felt it was his right to go into that building without notification. So the attorney for the Millers asked Gus about it, and Gus said, well, yes, I'm the zoning officer and I can go anywhere I want. I would love to see the transcript for his exact words. But that was the gist of it. At that point, the attorney for the Millers said, "Do you realize you're under investigation by the DA's office for trespass?" And he just looked, he said, "No." So I had put a right to know request in, probably a couple weeks later, to ask if anything came down from the DA's office. And Gus sent me an email and kind of jested about it and said, "Well, I guess we'll know when I'm dragged out in handcuffs," or something to that effect. I was like, he thinks it's a joke. His attitude is he's got this perceived power that he can do anything he wants, and his behavior is actually condoned by the Board of Supervisors, because he's never ever told about this at public meetings.
I really feel like these people, they don't even know their jobs. They're just winging it. The only thing that they do know is if I can do this for myself, for my buddy, then that's what we're going to do.
Right, correct, yeah. One of the things I thought we should bring up is how he's always ill-prepared, and how, because one of the policies for employees is to act with efficiency. Gus, as the employee who does a report every month, twice a month, has to go into stories on permits he issued and relaying stories that have nothing to do with the permits that are issued. He just feels it's okay to share people's personal business. I mean, okay.
So we've kind of had discussions about that,
Yeah.
because I think it's totally inappropriate that he goes on to elaborate about, certain residents extending their permits because they've been doing this for a while, whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's totally unprofessional. But at the same time, to give you a hard time when you were going to look at this file for property, but yet he's going to go and elaborate on a whole bunch of
Right.
information that really doesn't need to be elaborated on, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense there.
The fact that he is so inefficient and he has to drag the meetings out. I mean, I sit through those planning commission meetings. I see how Tom Strife is right on point. He just speaks to the issues. They go on and on and on about subjects. You sit there for what, some of the meetings are 2 hours long. And if they're supposed to act with efficiency, then learn. Okay, with Gus, he knows he has to do that report. And instead of having it ready when he gets in there, okay, he has the agenda. Once it starts coming down to his report, everybody has a copy, well, at least I do in the audience, has a copy of the agenda. Bring that up or have it on a second screen where all you have to do is click over to that. But instead, he just slowly goes through and everybody sits there. I mean, you've done the TikTok.
I've done music, TikTok, the whole thing.
Because it's such an empty, unproductive area it's just space, blank space. And it's like he wants to have his moment in the spotlight. That's what it looks like, rather than just being professional. These are the permits, and that's it. You don't have to talk about, oh, well, this one, he's doing this with the laundry room and doing that. That's nobody's business. A permit was issued for this exact reason. That's all anybody needs to know. If anybody wants to know, let him go and ask for the file, which I'm sure good old Gus will probably say that's not allowed. Really.
So have you since asked Gus for a file like that since that?
No, I have
20
not.
years ago?
No. In fact, I had asked him to see the file for my home. And he said, well, I don't have those. You'll have to ask Pat Davis. So he was saying, and that was most recently, actually. You'll have to ask Pat Davis. I don't have anything prior to, I forget what year it was. I don't know whether it's the year he took over, and I'm not sure even how long he's been an employee.
So it says, in keeping with this belief, officials and employees shall, to the best of their abilities. Do you think this is all that Gus is capable of?
It appears so. Actions are louder than words, but with him, he's very wordy. So you can imagine when somebody comes in for a permit. I mean, I was recently told by a resident that they had gone in for a permit and that Gus was nice. But the second time they went in, he was very nasty to them. So it's just not me, it's just not my impression, but Gus is very gruffy. There is certain personality type that go for government jobs because they want that power. And that's what Gus sees. He's got the authority to say no or yes to things, and he's going to use every bit of it, which is fine, but it's his lack of professionalism. So on a report card, I would put an F for failure. And for this board to allow any of those employees poor behavior at public meetings, that should be stopped immediately. That should be a priority. They are live streaming now.
He doesn't seem to care about that either.
No. I do want to thank our viewers. We have a steady group of people that always watch our videos and who comment. They're lovely people. They're very helpful as far as information, as far as the Sunshine Act, their opinions on motions recently being made. So thank you very much. And we will continue what we're doing, bringing information.